Well, thank you all so very much. It's really an honor to be here, and an honor to share with you the incredible excitement in this campaign. And I'm also here to hear from you. So I'm going to leave a lot of time for us to, have a conversation. I'll just say that this campaign is unfolding like an incredible whirlwind. It's sort of beyond certainly my wildest dreams of what it would be like. In fact, I had only wildest nightmares about what this campaign would be like. And a big thank you before I go further to Joe, I am to the Law Society for hosting me here today. I have run for office many times before as part of building an alternative politics. And I expected this to be the most difficult, kind of bitter, divisive race that one could ever imagine, but it's actually turned out to be exactly the opposite. This has been like giving away candy at Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa because people, are so widely disenfranchised, unhappy. 1 out of every 2 voters is estimated to be voting with their feet by staying home in this election. 90 million voters, that's twice as many as are expected to vote for either Mitt Romney or for Barack Obama. And it's no surprise that that's happening. So we're finding it just incredibly exhilarating to be getting the word out that people actually have a choice in this election that's not bought and paid for by Wall Street. There's just this staggering lack of integrity and vision and anything resembling even vaguely a solution to the many crises that we're facing now. And I would acknowledge in this audience especially, it's as if students, including graduate students, are public enemy #1 for the way that you have been disappeared from the public debate. Where's the discussion about the skyrocketing cost of higher education? Where's the discussion about the incredible skyrocketing student debt that has effectively turned a generation into indentured servants because the jobs, are not there to pay back these very unforgiving, burdensome debts that are very quick to declare you in default and then to subject you to all kinds of unfair fees, and people just get locked in, to the garnering of their wages for the indefinite future and so on. Where is the discussion about the climate crisis that we're facing that falls firmly on the shoulders of young people? And I'll come back to that in a moment. But then just to also acknowledge that the unemployment crisis falls nowhere harder than it does on the shoulders of young people, with recent college graduates now having an unemployment and underemployment rate of 50%. So you'd think they would be talking about this, yet they're not. It's as if the generation of students and graduates and graduate students don't exist, when in fact there are very good solutions, but of course they won't be put on the table by the apologists for business as usual, which is essentially what our politics has become. And then I also want to make the point up front about, sort of the question of Democrats versus Republican, and this fear campaign that, oh, you don't dare stand up for what we need and what you believe. You're supposed to go into the voting booth and use your vote essentially as a weapon against yourself by voting for one or the other of the Wall Street sponsored candidates. And in doing so, basically you give them a mandate, even if it's a reluctant vote, even if it's a lesser evilism vote, you're still giving them a mandate for 4 more years of the same. And in our view, we consider that the very definition of throwing away your vote. So we're saying, it's time to stand up for the things we deserve and for the solutions that really are within our reach. And I'll be going through those in a moment. But I first want to just clarify the record. one of our Green Party members is wearing a t-shirt here in front that says, "Are you stuck in an abusive relationship? I can help."
Political.
An abusive political relationship, exactly. Which is, it's funny because I came here to San Diego to see that, and that's exactly one of the themes that we've been talking about on the campaign trail, that this race is very much like conducting political therapy, and it's about helping people break up with this abusive political relationship instead of simply muttering over and over again the excuses that the abuser has told us that we should, propagate. That, oh, the Republicans made him do it, or he really loves us in his heart. He didn't mean to hurt our jobs, throw us out of our homes and strip us of our dignity and our health and all that. It was circumstantial, and oh, it will get better next year. There are so many analogies here to an abusive relationship, especially when you hear the people who are getting beat up, be the defenders of the power structure that is abusing them. So it's really important to clarify the record to help our friends break up with this bad relationship, or you if you're still trying to wrestle with this one. And so I'm just going to go through sort of the laundry list that clarifies that the key policies of George Bush have basically been embraced and expanded under the last 4 years of Barack Obama. So, for example, the Wall Street bailouts, it was $4.5 trillion under George Bush. I'm sorry, it was $700 billion under George Bush and $4.5 trillion under Barack Obama in money dispersed, plus another 16 in basically zero interest loans, which also cost us. So those bailouts went ballistic under Barack Obama. On the offshoring of our jobs, related to these free trade agreements. The NAFTA was signed by Bill Clinton. It was carried out under George Bush. And now, under Barack Obama, those free trade agreements were massively expanded. He came into office saying he was going to reform NAFTA and make it a fair trade agreement. He didn't do that. He actually just expanded it into Colombia and South Korea and Panama, and then went on to negotiate now this Trans-Pacific Partnership. I don't know if that's a name you're familiar with, but this is the free trade agreement to end all free trade agreements. It's essentially NAFTA on steroids. It's being negotiated in secret by 600 corporate representatives. Congress is not allowed to even know what's going on as this bill is being written. And it continues to offshore jobs, undermine our wages here at home, and also undermine American sovereignty by creating international corporate boards that can rule on the legitimacy of our laws and regulations as to whether or not they are acceptable. And if they're not, we have to pay big fines to these multinational corporations for the privilege of defending our air, our water, our food supply, our jobs, wages, labor protections, etc. We will be fined for violating their profits as opposed to protecting, our rights as citizens, our national sovereignty. So that's what we're getting in the realm of free trade and the economy from the Barack Obama administration. Not better than George Bush. On, you name it, on the expanding wars. People expected this to be the peace president. He sort of ran on that platform, sort of, depending on how closely you were watching the details here. But, on day 3, began to intensify the bombing into Pakistan. Where were the Republicans to blame that one on? They were nowhere to be found. In the same way that there were no Republicans to blame his early appointments for Wall Street that basically brought Wall Street into the White House, between Larry Summers, the architect of the Wall Street, waste, fraud, and abuse, engineered by laws passed under Larry Summers, very much driven by him. This was brought in to fix the crisis that, supposedly fix the crisis he himself had created, bringing in Timothy Geithner, as Secretary of the Treasury, who had been head of the Fed in New York and looked the other way while all that waste, fraud, and abuse was going on. So no Republicans to blame that on. This was the agenda of the president. and it's no surprise considering where his funding came from. But just to continue on the issue of the war that was expanded massively under this president, not only the bombing in Pakistan, but then the drone wars that expanded into Yemen and Somalia. Stanford and NYU released a report last week sort of documenting what's sort of common sense, that dropping bombs on weddings and funerals is not a good way to win the hearts and minds of people of the Middle East. And it certainly has not. We need to be retiring the drones rather than leading this whole new arms race across the world to, create these new drone wars, which are coming home to roost, we can be sure, whether they are our own government spying on us or somebody else's invisible drones. This is not, what democracy and a peaceful, just, green future looks like, but this is where Barack Obama has taken our war policy, including the surge into Afghanistan, which we've seen how much good, that did. Likewise, why did he withdraw from Iraq? I don't know if you were following this closely, but the reason the president withdrew, anybody following that?
Had to send him somewhere else.
Well, yes, he did have to send him somewhere else. That too, but there had been a withdrawal date essentially set by George Bush. And at that date, the U.S. forces no longer had immunity in Iraq, so-called status of forces agreement. We didn't have immunity. Barack Obama actually worked his tail off to extend that withdrawal date. So we might still be there in Iraq if he had had his way. But the president of Iraq would hear nothing of it because WikiLeaks had done a good job of sort of revealing what U.S. war policy was about. And Iraq said, no way, you're not going to stay here. So ironically, we owe a debt of thanks to George Bush for getting us out of Iraq. It was not Barack Obama who did it. His hand was forced, basically, by George Bush. So imagine that. Then just to name a couple others on civil liberties, I'm not sure how closely you're following that, but pretty darn scary what's going on there, where Obama has embraced the civil liberties violations of George Bush and actually codified them and then gone far beyond for essentially criminalizing the right to protest with H.R. 347, among others, which makes it essentially a felony to be wherever they decide. You don't even need to know it to be declared a felon and convicted, and sentenced to 10 years in jail for simply being on a site that becomes declared a site of special national security. And there are a number of ways it can be declared as such, but you don't have to be informed even. You can be there peacefully and legally protesting and then suddenly be a felon. The president, oh, thank you very much. The president also has the right to lock any of us up, to throw us into jail and essentially throw away the key without accusing us of a crime or putting us in front of a court and having a trial. Essentially, our right to the presumption of innocence has been taken away. This is through the National Defense Authorization Act. You may know of Chris Hedges, the wonderful former war correspondent for the New York Times. He challenged this in court, and his challenge was actually upheld, and it was found that this provision of the National Defense Authorization Act, pushed by the Obama administration, that this was unconstitutional. They put an injunction on it. Well, the President's Department of Justice then came back and challenged that on an emergency basis, as if it's an emergency to strip us of our right to the presumption of innocence. So the Obama administration, for some reason, regards this as an emergency to take away this right from us, which is really of incredible concern. That case is still playing out, but in the meantime, there's been an emergency override of the injunction, if you can follow my contorted legal thinking here. So, that in addition to the kill list and the president's asserting a right to assassinate anyone for his own private reasons without due process, again, they do have the right of assassination, or they're claiming the right. They're exercising their right to assassination, and the president oversees the kill list. on Kill List Tuesday when they review who's going to be killed, and this has included U.S. citizens, including a 16-year-old who was the son of a perceived political threat. So, you know, and one last one is climate, where the president has embraced the drill baby drill policies of George Bush, and in fact gone beyond in opening up more offshore oil, even in the wake of the Gulf oil disaster, without there being new protections or new technology in place to ensure greater safety to this very risky technology. He's expanded offshore oil, given the green light to more mountaintop removal and the devastation that that causes to local environments and water supplies. He's given the go-ahead to expand and drill for oil and coal and natural gas in our national parks and in the Arctic, which will be absolutely devastating to that very fragile environment. And given the thumbs up for fracking, which, as you may know, Jim Hansen, the respected climate scientist, said is essentially game over for the climate if we unleash that new, I'm sorry, not fracking, but actually shale oil, which he's also given essentially the green light to as well. And fracking will amount to the same thing, to essentially open up a whole new source of carbon emissions, as if it's, you know, let's hope it's not already game over for the climate, but, you know, it's not something that we can, you know, sit back on our laurels on. And to, you know, add insult to injury here, the president personally, this White House, undermined the international climate accords in Durban, South Africa, saying we could wait until 2020 for, you know, for an international agreement. Well, you know here in San Diego what it's like to have triple-digit heat waves, which I understand you had not so long ago. And I think you understand what it's like to have a prolonged drought and to be threatened by forest fires. I don't know how close they've come, but certainly we've seen record-setting events on all of those counts here in the United States, as well as the hottest 12 months on record. All of this is happening, as you probably know, with less than 1 degree centigrade of warming, and we are now on track for 6 degrees centigrade warming this century. This is not survivable. And as you know, warming is not something that happens and stops. It's a cycle. So once you tip into accelerating temperatures, you keep going. So it's not like it's going to end at 6 degrees either, because all kinds of tipping points get hit that contribute to further warming. So it's absolutely critical for us to start fixing this now. And, you know, that was basically to clarify that while there may be differences between Democrats and Republicans, as you can see from that track record that I just described, pretty hard to find them. You know, there are differences in the talk, and there are some differences on social issues and social positions. But if you look at really the core of their policies, the things that determine whether we're going to get out of here alive or not, they're pretty much indistinguishable. And while the Democrats may talk a warm and fuzzy narrative, if you actually get beyond the talk and you look at the walk, it's equally alarming. We are accelerating in the wrong direction under Democrats and under Republicans. It's really up to us to stand up, because we do have the solutions. We do actually have the power of public opinion too, because the public on issue after issue, by substantial majorities, supports the solutions that we are bringing into this election that can actually save the day. So we're really encouraging people to stand up and be that force that we need. In the words of Alice Walker, she says some wonderful things, the famous novelist. One of them is that the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. And in fact, we do. To look at any poll, people want these problems solved in a way that really works for us, not just for the economic predators that are controlling our political system. People want it solved, and they support, by substantial majorities, all of the solutions that we're promoting in our agenda. So it's all about us standing up, casting off this politics of fear that's been drummed into us by this abusive political relationship, standing up and breaking up with that abuse and casting off the politics of fear and instead going forward with the politics of courage, knowing, in fact, if you look back over history, it's always taken a social movement on the ground, which we've got plenty of right now, between Occupy, between student protests like in Quebec, where they actually just won their fight to roll back tuition increases, and they're fighting further for free public higher education, which is the way it should be and the way it was intended. We are seeing it in the Chicago Teachers Union that has broken with organized labor and that's actually advocating not just for their own security, but actually for their community, for quality education, and they're not taking marching orders from Democrats in line with organized labor. In fact, when I went there last week, what I heard from the teachers was that they hold Barack Obama more accountable than George Bush for destroying public education in this country, and actually saw the attack on public ed, the privatization, the force into charter school, and the teacher bashing and the union bashing that's going on now, carried out with a much heavier hand and much more aggressiveness under Obama than under George Bush. So, you know, that social movement is there in the form of the teachers as well. And likewise, the eviction blockades that are going on all around the country, the effort to hold the big banks accountable and so on. There is a social movement, and throughout history it's taken both a social movement as well as an independent political party. The two have made history together over and over again. In abolition, with the abolition of slavery, there was an independent political party called the Liberty Party that drove abolition into the agenda of another small independent political party just getting formed at that time called the Republican Party, which actually won the presidential election and, you know, drove abolition forward as a national priority. Likewise, during the fight for women's right to vote, women's suffrage, there was a social movement on the ground. There was a women's political party that advanced that issue, and with the labor movement, earning the right to form unions, to have a 40-hour work week, safe workplaces, and so on. There were political parties in the form of the socialists, the labor, the progressive, and other parties that actually made the threat get political, and that's what forced the hand of FDR, actually, on all of those issues, as well as on Social Security and the New Deal. They happened because there was that magical combination of a social movement and an independent political party that could drive that agenda into the broader public dialogue at a time when there was enormous public support for that agenda. So by bringing it into the light of day, you give it a life of its own so that it cannot be stopped. If we sit back and accept this strategy of silence, which is what the politics of fear tells us to do, it says just be quiet and vote for the lesser evil. Through that strategy of silence, you know, we have seen 10 years worth, excuse me, that silence is not an effective political strategy. And in fact, the politics of fear has brought us everything we were afraid of. All those reasons we were told to be quiet, we have gotten that by the droves because we've allowed ourselves to be silenced. And when we're silenced, there is no voice for the public interest. Without our voice, what do you have? You have the corporate-sponsored public relations campaigns. These are spin campaigns, and what are they competing for? They are competing for corporate funding. So you get these policies that just keep surging to the right. So while you might think that there might be marginal differences between Democrats and Republicans, they are both sinking ships. You could argue that one ship is sinking slightly less quickly. It's not yet at the bottom of the ocean. Maybe it's just halfway. But this is not how we get out of here alive. This is not how we have an economy that can provide jobs, that can have affordable education, higher education and graduate education. This is not a world that we can bring a next generation into and think that they're going to have a climate that can actually support civilization as we know it. We need to turn this around. The differences between Democrats and Republicans are very small compared to the difference between no democracy, which is essentially what we have now, and a real democracy, which is what we can create by injecting our voice into this conversation and bringing forward the solutions that, guess what, the American public is already clamoring for. So let me quickly just run through some of those solutions and then we can open it up for discussion. So the focus of our agenda is a Green New Deal. This is an economic program modeled on the New Deal that actually got us out of the Great Depression. And what FDR said at the time was, where the private sector cannot or will not create jobs, government will step in order to jumpstart those jobs. And essentially that's what the Green New Deal does. We create, however, not only public sector jobs to fill the gap and to help prime the pump to get the economy going. But we also create public sector jobs. So it's a broad spectrum of grants and incentives and subsidies to jumpstart community-based small businesses and worker cooperatives, as well as public services and public works. Let me just see. Okay, great. Just a little timing note here. Public services and public works, so that for people who don't have jobs, instead of going to the unemployment office and collecting a check, they go down to the employment office and collect a check, doing a job in their community that makes it healthier, stronger, more just and sustainable in one way or another. So we are talking about jobs, especially in the green economy. We don't just want to jumpstart the same old fossil fuel economy that's crashing down all around us, the same Wall Street, financialized economy. We want a real economy producing real goods and services that we the people need, and which is based here and which is not offshored and downsized. So that means jobs in clean renewable energy, conservation and efficiency, as well as a local, regionalized, sustainable food system, not this globalized frankenfood system that we have right now, which is a big driver of our public health epidemics. We need a healthy and sustainable, or largely organic food system. Public transportation, including active transportation, where you can bike or walk safely to a transit hub or to your place of work without taking your life in your hands. That's actually how we get to a real healthy society. Right now we have a sick care system. It's not a health care system. It just kind of treads water while it makes us bang on our knees by doing the things your mother always told you to do. That is, eat good, healthy food, especially all your fresh fruits and vegetables, and getting exercise. The Green New Deal actually permits us to integrate that into our way of life, as well as accomplishing pollution prevention by moving to green energy. And, you know, for example, the air pollution now is a big driver not only of the asthma epidemic, but also it turns out heart disease and stroke and a few other things like that. So really good things will happen to our health by greening our economies. What's good for the planet also turns out to be really good for the people. We're also talking about the jobs that we need to meet our needs socially, including jobs with rehiring those 300,000 teachers who've been laid off, daycare, after school, home care, affordable housing, etc. So it's a broad spectrum of jobs that greens our economy at the same time that it puts people back to work, creates an infrastructure for health. Right now we spend $2 trillion every year between public expenses and private business and personal out-of-pocket expenses for a sick care system. It's well understood 75% of those sick care dollars are spent on chronic diseases that are preventable at a tiny fraction of the cost if we were doing things like getting exercise, eating a healthy food system, and not poisoning ourselves with the air we breathe and the water we drink and our consumer products that are full of things like bisphenol A and PCBs and stuff like that. So by doing the right thing up front, we actually save a huge amount of money. So this pays for itself. It requires an initial investment about the size of the last stimulus package, but it pays for itself many times over, including because of the fact that it makes wars for oil obsolete when we have a green energy system here at home. And it's an additional expense of $1 trillion a year on the bloated military-industrial security complex. So that could be cut in half. We would still be the biggest military spender world over by at least a factor of 3. If we cut our military budget in half, we'd have hundreds of billions to put into the things we need here at home, including putting an end to student debt, forgiving student debt, and making public higher education free. And finally, I'll just mention, in addition, by moving to a system of Medicare for all, which would provide health care as a human right, this too is a pays-for-itself type solution because, excuse me, right now you may know 30% of every healthcare dollar is spent on bureaucracy and paper pushing with the incredible insurance morass that comes with this private insurance system. So by moving to a Medicare system that is lowering the age of eligibility to the moment of conception, essentially, by covering everybody, cradle to grave and beyond, that is, before cradle. I don't think we're covered after death, but before birth, certainly. Prenatal care would be part of this. And to mention also that this does include that huge component of care that is not provided for at all now in any insurance system virtually, and that is chronic care. So when people become really ill and they need nursing home care, they basically have to spend down into poverty in order to get covered by Medicaid. You know, this is just an incredible shame. So Medicare for All actually does all of that, and still it saves us trillions of dollars over the coming decade because of its efficiencies through streamlining insurance and because it also stabilizes medical inflation, which turns out to be one of the biggest drivers of rising costs. So we also call for, a couple others, equal marriage and equal LGBT rights, including equal rights in the workplace, which seems, that's just a matter of basic fairnesses, and the Green Party has essentially led that fight from the start. I was the first candidate in Massachusetts. I was the first candidate to actually promote equal marriage as a basic human right in the first state to actually then finally adopt equal marriage. And at the time that I, as a Green Party candidate, was advocating for equal marriage, the Democrats were debating whether they would stand up for civil unions, which they finally did, but it took us to sort of push the envelope and do the right thing. We're also calling for recognizing immigrant rights as human rights and creating a welcoming and legal path to citizenship for the immigrants who are a key part of our economy and our communities and who are essentially forced to come here as economic refugees when NAFTA put millions of farmers out of business. So we know how to fix the immigration problem. It's not by building a wall or through racial profiling and deportations. It's actually by stopping to force people to come here in order to feed their families and avoid starvation. So this too is fixable. So bottom line is, we are on the ballot for 85% of voters. We have fought our way into this because the system is designed to keep you silent and invisible. It's designed to eliminate competition. We're fighting to try to get into the debates, and I encourage you to go to our website, jillstein.org, or I don't know if we can pass around a sign-up list. Maybe we can pass the sign-up list around. What's that? Great, okay. Great, terrific. So if you want to be in touch, with the campaign and participate in these kind of things, we can stay in touch if you give us your email, or you can go to the website, jillstein.org, and sign up. We are, fighting to have a real debate to get solutions out there that people are clamoring for. And as far as we see it, nobody in their right mind expected Tahrir Square or Tunisia to happen, in a matter of weeks. People profoundly changed their political, universe, stood it on its head. And if word were to get out among 36 million college students and recent graduates who are effectively indentured servants, if word was to get out among those 36 million that there actually was a solution that would abolish student debt and make public higher education free, which, by the way, pays for itself, we know from the GI Bill, $7 returned in economic benefits for every $1 invested in public higher education. So this too is an investment that pays for itself many times over. So if word got out that there actually was a solution that people could actually use their vote, not as a weapon against themselves, but as a real tool to advance our own interests and the interests of our communities and our nation and our world and our planet, we could see things turn around in a big way. Now, am I holding my breath? I'm not holding my breath, but I'm not ruling it out either. And at the end of the day, we're going to decide, you know, that is we the people. And we also have the ability to get the word out. That's how Tahrir Square in Tunisia happened. Excuse me. It was especially, you know, a younger generation that's very good at the internet, that's very good at Facebook and Twitter, that got the word out, you know. It was not because the corporate press decided that they would give them a break, you know. Quite to the contrary, you know. In our campaign, we acknowledge that we don't actually have a press, we have an O-press and a re-press out there. We have to create the real press and be the real media ourselves, get the word out, let's see what happens. But whether we win the office, you know, if we did that, we can turn the White House into a greenhouse, you know, and that would be a very cool thing. If we did that, that would be wonderful, but even short of that, we can win the day. Even without winning the office, we can win the day by driving these real solutions into the public dialogue so they can start to move forward instead of just watching us accelerate backwards. We could begin to see movement forward. And we win the day by reclaiming our political voice and our political courage. And together, we can turn this breaking point that we face, a breaking point for people and the planet and the economy and our democracy, we can turn that breaking point into the tipping point that we need to take back our democracy and the peaceful, just, green future we deserve. Thank you for making it so. Together we're unstoppable. Thank you. So we can open it up for questions. Go ahead.
Well, it's kind of big, and I actually think maybe you can refer me to website material. At this time in history, there's almost 7 billion people, and with computers, there's really no, it's become a world economy, because everything can be done online. So
yes.
What can you do when everybody wants stuff, and 7 billion people need to survive? I mean, how can you not have an environmental crisis?
Yeah, exactly, and we're certainly heading that way right now. So it's very worrisome. On the other hand, you know, there are, in my experience, and I've largely worked within a state, and I've seen things really, what I've seen change at the state level is not the government, you know, because we have not reached critical mass yet to make that change, although we've laid the groundwork for it. And what I've seen in my career as an activist and an environmental activist, which I've been for about 20 years, what I've really seen change is public opinion, and have seen people extremely desperate and anxious and worried about what's happening, although people don't claim, you know, they won't say that, but when you enable that conversation to happen, you hear it. What really made me very hopeful was a referendum campaign that we ran in Massachusetts, actually calling for a redefining of economic development. And we posed this question: should we shift our economic subsidies from large multinational fossil fuel and nuclear-based corporations to small businesses and cooperatives at the community level in the green economy, in clean renewable energy, local organic food production, public transportation, clean manufacturing? We just posed that question. And the Green Party was part of a coalition here that did not have a lot of money, so we got it on the ballot in 20-some cities and towns, many of them very poor, urban, post-industrial, impoverished communities, and some tree hugger communities too. And we thought, wouldn't it be great? We didn't have money to educate or conduct a campaign around it, but we thought, wouldn't it be great if we got 10 or 15% that supported that? In fact, we got between 75 and 95% in all communities. And to me, it was such an eye-opener that the reason we presume people are, you know, they just want things and they just want jobs, they don't want the environment, and etc. They don't care about the climate. The problem is the way the choice is always framed. It's always framed as either your survival or the trees, you know. But when it's framed in a different way, which is, you know, do you want what we've got now, more of the same, or do you want an economy that actually protects the environment and ensures that we're going to have a water supply and a food supply and all that going forward? People will always go for that. In fact, polls show now it's about 70 or 75% of the American public that feels like we really need a solution to the climate problem. And so, in my experience, we have not had trouble getting the public to go along with us when we actually get to the microphone. And it's not only because this stuff makes sense and people are really worried about it, but it's also, they know how to smell a rat. You know, they know what a rat looks like, sounds like, talks like, and smells like. And we are not that rat. And, you know, I have found that as an independent political party that doesn't take corporate money, that's not oozing with, you know, corruption and self-importance, that we, you know, it's really not hard for us to move public opinion in the same way that when I was in those debates with Romney, they had to take me out, you know, much like they had to keep Ralph Nader out of the debates. Because, if you know, much like Jesse Ventura won the governorship of Minnesota by getting into the debates, because the public does not like the choices that it's being offered now. They don't like corrupt, corporate-sponsored politics. And if you can make a reasonable case, you know, people are really worried and really desperate now across the board. And for us to be able to provide real solutions, I think just creates a whole world of possibility. It makes me very hopeful. Let me just open it up to other questions. Yeah?
A lot of people, since they know that I'm in the Community Party, they ask me, they knew that you were coming, they've come up to me, law professors too, have said, really worried because this election is so tight. And I know you touched upon this before about throwing your vote, but what do you say to people when they say, we're worried that Obama's not going to win and America is going to go to the dark ages if we vote for you? And this happened with Ralph Nader too. Everybody roundly blamed him for Al Gore losing.
Exactly.
What do you say to people?
You know, there are a couple strategies, and I usually go through them all. And if it doesn't work, then I move on. Because for every person who's kind of stuck in this abusive relationship, this abusive political relationship, there are many more out there, and usually they're under 30. There are many more out there, you know, or they are people of color, and they're poor, and they're unemployed, and they don't have a way forward. And that's where most of the American public is. So a lot of this is just changing who you're talking to, because there are so many people that actually agree with us, they don't need persuading. And the people who are stuck in this abusive mindset, this abusive relationship mindset, it can be very hard, you know, to help them work their way through it. But to tell you the truth, I find it's really, there are so many people who, you know, they articulate that concern, but then you talk them through it and they're ready to go. Mm-hmm. The first interview I ever had on National Public Radio with this campaign was with a host in San Francisco, and I was warned she was a diehard Democrat. It was going to be Nader bashing all the way. And that's how it started, you know, from the very beginning. And I talked her through Obama's record. Let's not just look at the talk, let's look at the walk. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me for 4 years, really shame on me. And then in another political election, really shame on me. So it's really important to get past the warm and fuzzy narrative, forget the talk, let's look at the walk, and see how much better off we've been under Barack Obama. Almost nada. And the concessions that he has provided are really token. So his support, for example, for equal marriage, very late in the game, and it was, I personally support this, but I'm not going to do anything to advocate for it. You know, and he had likewise refused to sign an executive order to establish equal rights in the workplace for the LGBT community. You know, so he won't act, he'll just like give a little token. Same thing on immigrant rights, the solution that he provided of basically 2-year worker permit program for students and former soldiers up to age 30. That's not really a solution. It doesn't address the problem for most people. So, you know, important to focus on the record, give that a try, see if facts matter. If facts don't matter, you know, then you might spend your time better somewhere else. It's a guideline of political organizing in general, or any kind of organizing. You don't want to spend your time talking to people who are either dead set against you or people who already agree with you. You want to talk to the people who don't know about you, you know, and those who are persuadable. So you may want to move on. But another thing to bring out is that this whole Nader bashing thing is a public relations campaign designed to silence opposition. Because in fact, the studies on the ground, if facts matter at all, studies on the ground done by CNN and others, they did exit polls, and what they found in Florida was that voters who voted for Nader came equally from Democrats and Republicans, but the vast majority of them actually were former Ross Perot voters who were independents that otherwise would not have given their vote to either party. Vast majority, something like by a 6 or 7 or 8 to 1 margin. So in fact, it was not Nader who stole the election, it was the Supreme Court that stole the election by calling off the vote count, essentially, where Al Gore was on track to win. So it's really important to reject that and to point out to them how the politics of fear has actually brought us everything we're afraid of. When I went through this litany with this radio host, and then I ended saying, you know, it's like being on 2 ships that are both sinking. If you're on one of those ships, which is sinking faster than the other, is your objective to just get into the other ship, which is also sinking, but not quite as quickly? Of course not. Your objective, my 5-minute warning, okay? Your objective is to actually get onto a lifeboat. And we got to get on that lifeboat. It's not okay to just sink less quickly. We actually need to survive. We need a world that we can live in. It's not just about our children's future at this point. It's happening in real time on our watch. It's about whether we're going to have a future. So, you know, I find people are fairly persuadable. And what she said at the end of this interview, I left her with that image of the 2 sinking ships. And we said goodbye. And this was a phone interview. And I stayed on the phone because sometimes they come on and they say thanks and, you know, see you again sometime. And she didn't come on, but I heard what she said to her listeners, which was, boy, that made so much sense. Gee, I could really vote for her. And one other I have to tell you real quick. This was another NPR interview, this one in Oregon, about 3 weeks ago, where I did the 3-minute overview. The first caller said, I'm a lifelong Democrat, and I just have to say, it's so good to finally hear the Democratic Party agenda in this race. I'm going to vote for you. And then the host jumped in and interrupted him and said, but I see here on my note from the call screener, you were going to accuse her of stealing votes from Barack Obama. And what he said was, well, I was going to say that until I heard what she had to say, and boy, did she win my vote. So I just hold that out as, you know, part of what we say to people who need to be moved along from this abusive relationship. So maybe time for 1 or 2 really quick ones. Yeah.
I just want to say it's going to take a good long time for us to shed the shackles of this 2-party duopoly, but thank you so much for your courage and for pushing the envelope.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes. As we all know, there's a lot of structural barriers for third-party access, and I'm wondering about if you could comment on a strategy for overcoming that, and potentially even cooperation and coordination with other third parties to systematically look for things like instant runoff voting and things like that.
Yes, I'll just say real quickly that a lot of these structural barriers could just be solved, you know, in the blink of an eye. Instant runoff voting, it's also called ranked choice. It lets you go to the polls and rank your choices. So if your first choice loses, say it was Ralph Nader, your vote would then be reassigned to your second choice. There are many cities around the country and countries around the world that use this kind of system. It completely gets rid of that spoiler fear, the fear about you know, splitting a vote constituency and so on. Proportional representation does the same thing. It ensures that everybody's vote really counts. It's none of this kind of winner take all, but everybody has a voice. It ensures that we have a multi-partisan democracy, which is what we really need. many voices and many choices, that's how you get to a creative and effective political dialogue. So we could get there. You know, the question is sort of, what do you do next? We've actually been collaborating with many third parties in our fights to open up some of the restrictive ballot access laws. And one, you know, it's very hard to fight this. So several other parties have collaborated with us. We have the endorsement, for example, of the Socialist Alternative Party and other independents. I hear from Tea Partiers all the way to right-to-lifers and, you know, religious voters and so on, that they're going to vote for us just because we agree on basic principles about opening up our democracy. So we see our campaign in this ways kind of helping to be the vanguard to see if we can push through and get the rules of the game changed to open things up. And one of the really exciting possibilities now is if we can break 5%, which is tough, it's very hard, but we've spent the first 10 months just getting on the ballot, and the system is designed that way, so a lot of people haven't heard of us. We're just now beginning to get the word out. If we can effectively get the word out, we could boost our numbers. We've already gone up from undetectable to 1% to 2%. That may not sound like much, but that's millions of voters, and that's, you know, incredible achievement, especially when we haven't even started to campaign. We're just now transitioning into a real campaign and to get the word out. If we can boost ourselves from 2% to 5% and actually have a 5% impact, a whole bunch of things change. We have ballot access then. So we could start the next campaign when the campaign starts instead of having to spend, you know, 40%, 80% of it really, just getting on the ballot. We could hit the ground running in the next campaign. It also provides a $20 million grant, which may not sound like much, but we've done everything we have so far with $500,000. If we can raise another $500,000, we basically get a 40-to-1 match to be able to actually then drive this thing forward, hit the ground running, have a real budget, and really see things change. So with that, I am being called to the next appointment, but I want to thank you all so much. Go to our website. If you can contribute, consider making a contribution. You can get your money back 40 times over if we make this. It's basically a 40-to-1 match if we make this threshold. And you know, just to be online, to be on Twitter, to be propagating our newsletter and so on, can help get the word out to the majority of voters that's actually waiting to change this breaking point into a tipping point and to take back our future. Thank you so much for all of your work.